Welcome to the How to Program with Java podcast, where all you need is the desire to learn, and you too can become a Java programmer with absolutely no knowledge of programming. And now, your host, Trevor Page.
Okay, so thank you very much for that lovely introduction. As you may have noticed, I have a little bit of a change to my intro music there. So a big thanks goes out to Mr. John Melly for recording that little tidbit for me. So really, I wanted to put something a little different into my intro there, so I can really have some foundation to build this entire podcast on, and that's the promise that I'm going to teach anyone how to program who really doesn't have any knowledge whatsoever in programming. If I can teach someone with no knowledge how to, be a programmer and be the thing they want to be, then I feel like I've accomplished something. I've accomplished exactly what it is that I want to get done in this podcast. So, having said that, I think today we'll start episode number 3 with the topic of control structures. But first, real quick, if you do have any questions or concerns, or if you're lost or anything at all, even if you just have a general comment, I welcome you to go to my my website at howtoprogramwithjava.com and just leave a comment on any of the posts there, and I'll be sure to get back to you as soon as possible. I love helping people out, and this is why I'm doing this whole podcast thing. So do not be afraid to ask questions, and I promise I will get back to you as soon as I possibly can, and hopefully with an answer that will get you moving along in your career to become a programmer. So, having said that, let's start off with control structures. It's our topic for today. Let's start off by going to Wiki. I love going to Wiki for a nice, complicated explanation of the topic at hand, and then dissecting that and explaining it in more human terms. So for all you people who already know about control structures, I'm sure you'll listen to this definition and say, okay, yeah, that's no problem. Been there, done that. If you've never talked or never heard about control structures before, this is certainly going to sound foreign, but don't worry, I'll break it down for you, okay? So, control structures. A control structure is a block of programming that analyzes variables and chooses a direction in which to go based on given parameters. Okay? The term flow control, or just code flow, details the direction the program takes. Okay? So hence, it's the basic decision-making process in computing. Flow control determines how a computer will respond when given certain conditions and parameters. Okay, so that's, like I said, very long-winded, very technical, but it's really not describing anything too complex, okay? It's just wordy is all it is. So let me try to explain what a control structure is in what I would call human terms, in normal person talk, okay? So, we're all familiar with code in the sense that it exists. It's something that you write down and it tells the computer what it is that you want to do, or at least what you want the computer to do, okay? And I would hope that you guys understand that when code runs, it'll run line by line. Okay, so starts at line 1, goes to line 2, line 3, line 4. Okay, line by line, it looks at every single one of these pieces of code, every line of code, and it'll run whatever it is that line is describing to the computer what it wants the computer to do. Okay, each line does that. So when we talk about control structures, they are a piece of code, or at least a concept inside of coding, that allows the code to flow differently. Okay? So if the code is flowing line by line, from top to bottom, and for the most part, from left to right, just like you would read a book, top to bottom, left to right, now, control structures come in and modify that code flow. Okay, again, code, line by line, top to bottom, left to right, for the most part. Control structures will modify that. So it could be that it skips certain lines of code. Okay, it control structures tells the program, the computer, to skip these lines. Okay, it could tell it to take a certain number of lines and keep running over and over and over again. So repeating the same code over and over. And you might not know why that might be important, but I'll get into that. Or perhaps it could tell it to, well, I guess, go to a completely different location inside of the code. That's something that you can do inside of a control structure. So all control structures are, I guess a good way to look at it is it's like a choose your own adventure book. If you've ever read any choose your own adventure books before, you open up the book and you read, let's say, the first 3 pages. Okay, page 1, page 2, page 3, just like the code would be read, line 1, line 2, line 3. And when you get to page 3, you get to choose what direction you want your character to take in the novel, in the book that you're reading. So at the bottom, it'll say if you want to do, option 1, if you want to choose, adventure 1, turn to page 56. If you want to do adventure number 2, turn to page 74. If you want to do, adventure number 3, whatever, you get the idea, right? A control structure does pretty much the exact same thing. It will read line 1, line 2, line 3, and it will get to a control structure that you have coded in, and the control structure will tell the code if we should keep going to line 4, line 5, line 6, or perhaps skip line 4, line 5, line 6, and go to line 7, line 8, line 9. Okay, that's the basic concept of a control structure. Okay, so what would the syntax be for a control structure? Well, in case you don't know what syntax is, that's something that I'll talk about in a podcast, probably, 3 podcasts from now. I'll talk a little bit more about this. But a quick introduction, a syntax is just the rules behind how the code should appear, what it should look like, what keywords you can use to tell the computer what it is you want to do. It's kind of like a syntax in any language, like English or French or whatever. Each one of those has a syntax, a way that words should be spelled, and the accent aigu for the E if it's French, and all that stuff, right? Those are all syntax. So this control structure has a certain syntax, and some of them, one of them is called an if statement, if statement. Other ones are loops, like a for loop, a while loop, or a do while loop. Okay, these are all different kinds of control structures in Java specifically. Now, in the bigger picture, with any programming language like C++ or C# or Visual Basic.net, or there's tons of programming languages out there. Pascal. I'm not going to go and name them, all of them, obviously, but they all have control structures. So this is something very common amongst all programming languages. I would assume all of them would have if statements. All of them should have loops in some way, shape, or form. I don't believe all of them have a for loop and a while loop and all this stuff. They all have their own flavor of loops, but it's the same fundamental concept across all these different programming languages, and it's that you can skip lines of code, you can execute certain lines of code over and over and over again, okay? And these are all very useful things that you want to do in your programming code. So what's a good example? Let's say we have, I like to use the contacts example. So you have an address book, kind of like on your computer, you have a whole bunch of contacts, email addresses, okay? Your mom, your dad, your sister, your best friend, your significant other, whatever, right? You all have emails and maybe phone numbers and first name, last name, maybe their actual address, okay? Each one of these are contacts, okay? Which, again, these are objects. So a contact would be an object in Java. We talked about objects in the last podcast. So let's say we have a contact object, but we have several objects, several contacts. So let's say we have, 5 contacts, okay? Your mother, your brother, your father, your sister, your best friend, whatever. So we have a kind of a list of contacts, a whole bunch of them. And we want to be able to look through all these contacts like we would be turning the page of our address book. Okay, page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, looking through the contacts because we want to find, let's say, our brother's phone number or something, or brother's email address, okay? So what would you do in the real world? Well, you'd have your address book or your virtual address book. And, well, I guess the virtual address book is not a very good example because you probably would just type in their name and it would search it. But let's think of maybe a physical address book. You would turn the pages, okay? You would search for that particular contact. So you flip page 1, page 2, page 3, and you're looking for your brother's name or something like that in your address book, your contact book. This is something that you can do in code as well. So let's say we had this list of a whole bunch of contacts, and we want to flip through them one by one until we find who it is that we are looking for. Okay? This can be achieved by using something called a loop. And generally speaking, this is probably a good job for what we call a for loop. And that's for F-O-R, not for F-O-U-R like the number. F-O-R, for. So we go through a for loop. And what that would do is, for loops are good for when you know exactly how many times you want to flip through something. It's called iterate. How many times you want to iterate over something. So we have our contact book or our address book, and we know that, let's say we know that we have 5 contacts inside of this book. Okay? We want to loop through it 5 times to search for the person that we want to find. So we'd have some code that would say, what is the first name of this particular contact? So we start on page 1. What's the name? Well, it's your mom. Is your mom the person that we want to be looking for? No, we want to find your brother. So flip. No, next page. So then, okay, page number 2 is, let me read the name of the person on this page. This is your father. Okay, no, we don't want my father. I want my brother. So flip the page. Go to the next iteration, okay? So we can have the same block of code that says, what is the name? Is the name who we're looking for? If it is, then great, stop looking. If it's not, go to the next page. Okay, so that's some generic code that we could write that we can then loop through over and over and over and over. And since it's generic enough, we only have to write the one, I guess that's 2 lines of code. What is the name of the person on the page? Is it the person we want? Yes. If not, keep going. I guess that would be 3 lines of code, but whatever, that's just semantics. That's the generic code that we can write, and we can sort of wrap that in this thing called a for loop, okay? Or just a loop in general if you don't want to get too specific at this point in time. And that loop would go through those same, 2 or 3, whatever lines of code until we find the person we're looking for. And when we do find the person we're looking for, maybe we can tell it to go and do some specific thing like, call them or something. If we don't find them, then maybe we can do something like, notify the person that we haven't found, or we didn't find the person that they were looking for, okay? Possibilities are endless. Whatever it is that you want the program to do, you can put that in there. But again, that's outside of the scope of what I want to talk about right now, because this is only episode 3. It's control structures, again, in summary, it's a way to modify the code flow from completely, top to bottom to be something a little bit different depending on how you want your program to react. Okay? It's really as simple as that. It's a scary definition and a scary name for something that's very simple. And this is a very common thing in programming where they give these really weird names to these concepts that just sound out of this world, but they're really they're easy once you see them in practice, okay? Or at least if you have someone to just explain them in plain English, they're really not that hard. So, since I am talking about the for loop, I think I also want to talk about the other kinds of loops that I mentioned earlier, which is the while loop. Okay, so like I said, the for loop is good for when you know exactly how many times you want to loop through a specific piece of code. So the example I'd given was you have contacts, and you have, let's say, 5 contacts. So it wouldn't make sense to, go through it 6 times or 8 times, because you only have 5. So that's a good candidate for using the for loop. Well, what if you don't know how many times you want to go over the same piece of code? Okay, there's a way to do that. Of course there's a way to do that. It's called the while loop. So the while loop says that I will loop through your specific piece of code indefinitely until a certain condition becomes false. So what that means, how could I use this? What's a good example to use in practice? A good one is when you are reading through a file. Okay, a simple file. Let's picture just a text file that has information in it. Let's say it's listing. What's a good example? A bunch of, let's say it's contacts for no apparent reason. You have a file on your computer that just lists first name, last name, and then a phone number. Okay, and this file, let's say it has 500 lines or 1,000 lines, or who knows how many lines of contacts you have in this file. Okay, but what you want to do is you want your program to read every single line of the file and read in the contact information until it reaches the end of the file. So you won't know specifically when you start reading the file how many lines are in the file. Okay, so you just want to keep reading and reading and reading and reading until you just hit the end, and you don't know when the end is going to come. So that's an excellent example of when you should use a while loop. So you loop through the file until you hit the end of the file. So I think the while loop condition would be, while you can still read the next line of the file, I think is how you would write it out in code. And again, I don't want to get into the actual syntax, because it doesn't translate well over a podcast. I wouldn't want to sit here and go into depth about all the little brackets and all little symbols that you need to write in when you're doing your code. I think that's an activity that I want to leave to you after you've listened to me talk about the code, just because this would be like a real classroom context where the teacher is just lecturing about a specific concept. And then I want you to go to my blog afterwards, in the show notes, which for this one it'll be howtoprogramwithjava.com/session3, 3 the number, not spelled out. And I'm going to have a link that'll point to a blog post which talks about control structures. And there you'll see the beginnings of the actual syntax and how it should look. Okay? So that's kind of like your homework. I'll talk about these things, and then you can go home and learn about them and put them into practice. Okay? So let me go back to talking about this while loop. So you iterate through the file until you can't iterate through it anymore. So the while condition would be while you can still read the next line. So what that'll do is, you can have the while loop, and inside of the while loop you would have, read the name, read the phone number, and do whatever it is that you want to do with the name and phone number. Okay? And this would keep going and keep going and keep going and read every single line of the file until, imagine it wouldn't be able to read the file anymore. So then it would probably say, no, I can't read the file anymore. So boom, get out of my while loop. And now it's not going through, lines 678, 678, 678, 678 over and over and over again. It'll now go to 9, 10, 11, 12, or whatever, right? Every program's different. But that's the basic concept of the while loop. So again, for loop you would use when you know exactly how many iterations you would want to go through. The while loop just keeps looping until your condition is false. Okay? Seem fairly straightforward, hopefully. Now, there's one little issue when you're dealing with the while loop, and this is kind of a funny story. When I was early on in my career as a programmer, I think I was a junior programmer in my first year at a job in the Greater Toronto area. I had a little bug in my code, a little mistake, and that code actually made it into what we call our QA environment, which was, it's an environment that, let's say, 100 or so people would be accessing. And my code made it into this little environment where 100 people were playing around. And my code was wrong, and it was because of a while loop. And what had happened was the condition that says, when should I stop looping through, lines 6, 7, 8 over and over, that condition never actually ever became false. So that condition was always true, which in the world of computers, the computers aren't very smart. It just kept on going through line 678, 678 forever. So what happens when that happens? Well, that's essentially called a crash. So the entire QA environment essentially froze. So no one was able to do any of their work, and they had to, turn everything off with this QA environment, and I had to fix my code because eventually we debugged and found out that it was actually Trevor's line of code that was messing things up. So that's one thing that you have to be careful of with the while loop. You need to be aware that it could run forever if you're not careful. So that's all right. If you're just doing it on your own computer at home, there's an easy way to stop it. There's an easy way to make that infinite loop stop happening so that your computer can relax and everything will be okay. So don't worry about that. But I just want to make you aware that there's some dangerous things that you can do in the sense of when you're in your real job. You want to make sure that your code is pretty solid. So you want to test it before you just send it out to the door. So that's a lesson that I learned early in my career, and hopefully you guys will learn it while you're doing your work with me and not when you're doing your work with someone who's actually paying you, because they frowned upon that kind of thing. So that's, in a nutshell, what control structures are all about. It has everything to do with the flow of the code, and it has everything to do with you modifying the flow of the code. Okay, hopefully, like I said in my last podcast, I've now explained this thing over and over and over again to the point where you're saying, for the love of God, stop saying what you're saying. So, that means that my job here is done. Having said that, I know that you guys have your choice of Java podcasts to listen to, and I'm glad that you've chosen the How to Program with Java podcast to listen to today. It fills me with good feelings of positivity and happiness. So really, I thank you guys for listening to me ramble on about this topic for the last, 25 minutes or so. It means a lot, and I'm hopefully you guys are getting as much out of this as I hope that you're going to get out of this. And if you have any questions, by all means, let me know on the blog, post a comment, or even send me an email directly. I think I have my email address in session 1, but I'll include it in session 3's notes as well. So you can email me directly, and I will for sure get back to you, I promise. Okay, guys? So take care. Best of luck in your programming adventures, and I can't wait to do the next show. So bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the How to Program with Java podcast. Please visit howtoprogramwithjava.com for more useful Java tutorials.